Bonjour. Ah, ça va? Hello. Good morning. The first time I ever used a computer was when I was in graduate school. I was working on a Ph.D. in psychology, and I was taking a programming course, and I went to run my first program ever, some silly program that you do when you're trying to learn how to program a computer. You know, it takes some numbers and does something with the numbers. And in order to run my program, I had to use these. Now, I'm looking around the room, and I think most of you are too young to remember what this might be, although maybe you saw it in an old movie or something. This is a punch card, and I won't tell you exactly what year it was, but in order to use a computer, you had to use these special machines that you typed on, and it would punch holes in these cards, and then you would take your cards to the computing center, because the computers were in a special building, because they had to have all this special, air conditioning and so on. And you gave your cards to the man behind the desk, because he was the computer scientist, because regular people were not allowed to use a computer, only the computer scientist. Now, my memory is that he was wearing a long white lab coat because he was a scientist, but I think that part of my memory is faulty. I don't think that's true. So I handed him the cards, and he ran the program, and then I had to wait like 20 minutes and go over to the shelves where there were these, the big pieces of computer paper, and one would have your name on it, and I ran over very excited, and there was a big set of paper I looked through, and it's blank, and it's blank, and it's blank, there's nothing there. And then there were two words, and the two words were, job aborted. And that was it, which I took to mean that something had gone wrong, and my program didn't run. Now, I was working on a Ph.D. in psychology, in cognitive psychology, how people think, how people learn. And I became instantly fascinated with this. You would think I might have been discouraged, but I wasn't. I was fascinated because I thought to myself, if everyday people like me are trying to use these things called computers, if they say things like job aborted and that's it, it's not going to work very well. And I became, as I later realized, enchanted with the idea of human factors, of human-computer interaction, of the field of how do we design stuff, technology, so that it really works with the human, not just does what's best with the computer. Now, I didn't know at the time that this was a field of study, because I was so new to it. I found out later you could actually do this for a living. But I started incorporating right then and there throughout my graduate program this idea of the interaction between people and technology. Now, our talk today is on the future of human-technology interaction, but it's actually helpful. In fact, I think it's critical. If we're going to talk about the future, we have to have an understanding of where we've been so far. So, I'm going to, if you will let me, indulge me in taking just a few more minutes to talk about the past, and then we'll talk about the future. So these punch cards, I have some quizzes for you. This is the first quiz. So the first use of a punch card in a commercial computer, was it before or after 1955? Commercial computer, not research, not academic. How many people think it was before 1955? And how many people think it was after? Okay, and the date was 1952. The first use of it in a IBM 701. Now, actually, technically, punch cards were used many, many years before. I had the lucky opportunity to go to a little town near Lille, France, where they have a wonderful textile loom museum, if you've ever been there. And I was really impressed to see punch cards from 1801 that were used to program the tapestries that were made. And the woman that was giving us the tour said it took 10 years to program the punch cards for one tapestry. So it made me feel a little better about my first example and my problem with the computer, because it didn't take me 10 years. All right. So moving on, we had punch cards, and then we graduated to being able to talk to the computers with kind of like a typewriter machine, and it would talk back to us, and that was better. And then we had screens. This was a big invention, and there were those little green letters on a black screen. All right, next quiz. First commercial computer screen, before or after 1967? How many people say before? Now you guys are hesitant here. How many people say after? Okay, and the answer is after. 1969, the data point 3300, a wonderful machine. And if you were really lucky, you got amber or orange letters on a black screen. If you had one of these, you were really cool. That was really cool. All right, with every new technology, and as we go through all these advances, they provide opportunities for human-computer, human technology interaction, and they provide challenges. So for instance, just to give you a couple of examples, with those punch cards, one of the problems with the punch cards, besides the fact that they were kind of a pain to create, was you could drop them, and everything would be all out of order. Amazingly, there was a machine. As long as you had numbered them, it would put them back in order for you, which was really handy if you had a lot of them. With the screens, the human-computer interaction challenge was that there was a lot you had to remember, and because usually the developers and programmers were trying to squeeze as much as possible in, you had a lot of acronyms, you had to remember the codes. There was a lot of demand on human memory by trying to use screens like this. Now I'm going to talk about the history and the future in 4 distinct eras of human-computer interaction. So what I've just described up to now was what I consider the first era. And in the first era, the computer is a tool, and it's used by computer specialists, and the goal of the computer-human interaction is to have the computer perform some tasks that humans aren't that great at, like calculation and combing through data and so on. And so that was our first era of human-computer interaction. Now we're going to move forward into the first graphical user interface, otherwise known as GUI. So the other one before the graphical user interface is usually known as a character user interface. So we call that CHUI. And then we have GUI, and then we have voice, which is VUI. So, you know, we kind of have all these CHUI, GUI, VUI. Sounds like cartoon characters. But this was one of the first GUIs. And this allowed us to have more than just words on the screen, right? We could have pictures. Okay, quiz. First graphical user interface, before or after 1978? How many people say before? How many people say after? That's about a 50-50 split. After 1981. And actually Xerox came out with the first one, and then some people from Xerox left and started Apple, right? And then came just the proliferation of graphical user interfaces throughout the years. We got more and more sophisticated about how to design these things called GUIs. And we even did something that's called skeuomorphism. So the interesting idea during this era was that we were trying to make the physical digital. We were trying to take what was in our physical world and figure out some kind of digital way to present that in 2 dimensions. And sometimes we did things like this. This is a DJ, a music software, and so it looks like a turntable, you know. Of course, it's not really a turntable, and you can't really put the needle down, but it kind of was mimicking that. Or, you know, you have books, well, then you should have a bookshelf that looks like real wood, right? Now, we got away from this idea of skeuomorphism, and that's when the whole flat design thing came in. But basically, we were trying to take the physical and make it digital. And this had its own challenges and opportunities as well. So one of the wonderful things about going to a GUI was it took away some of that demand on the human memory. So as soon as we had something, just the simple invention of the drop-down list, right? So you could click on a little arrow and a list would come down and show you all your options. Before you had to memorize all the options and know exactly what to put in. Now you could just choose. That one little invention in the interface was had a huge human benefit. So we had the first era, now we had the second era. The computer is still a tool, but now it's a tool for everyone, not just specialists. And the goal now in this era was to make the physical digital. And term user-friendly appeared because, before that we didn't assume computers were going to be friendly. All right, next, of course, we have the internet. I love looking at some of these old internet websites. First commercial internet website, before or after 1995? Before? Ooh, a lot of votes for that. After? Okay, and the answer is before. 1993, the Global Network Navigator was the first commercial one. So now we have internets, and now we have an interesting thing happening, because now it's not just on a computer, it's not even just on a laptop or a tablet. We have smartphones, we have different devices. We now can start building in sensors into our clothing and use that to do things. And we have another interesting aspect that happened during this time. This is Eric Whitaker. He spoke at the USI conference in 2014. Did anyone see him at that event? Yeah. He's a composer. And now we get to find out if my sound is working here. Let's see. No? I don't think it is. So, suddenly, there it is. I'm just going to take it down a little bit so I can talk over it. So what Eric Whitaker did, he's a composer. He composes choral arrangements like you're hearing. And he made a video of himself directing. And then he sent that video out on the internet, and anyone could download the video and download the music and sing their part. And then he brought it back together. There were over 5,000 people in this particular choral arrangement that he had take part in this. So this kind of use of the internet takes us into what I believe is this new phase of collaboration and communication. And then we get interesting devices, such as voice. And voice is taking us into some very interesting challenges. Let's see if this will work.
Susan, I just want to know if you like Christmas or not.
Sorry, I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
Alexa, do you like building snowmans?
I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
But Alexa, but are you, Alexa, are you alone in the basement?
I wasn't able to understand the question I heard.
But Alexa, are you alone in the basement?
Finally, just before midnight, she danced with Tom.
Alexa, stop it! Alexa, I just don't want you to do things. If I say go clean up the kitchen, you will. Okay, Alexa? Alexa, remember when I was a baby? Alexa, remember when I was a baby?
I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
But Alexa, remember when I was a boy? She doesn't understand.
She doesn't understand, he says. So we, the whole technology to develop voice, the first voice interface I worked on was in the 1980s. And so I've been waiting a really long time for this to work. And at dinner last night, someone said, well, it's happening so fast. And I was like, well, for some of us, we've been waiting a really long time. And it's working so much better than it used to. But then obviously, right, depending on the context, it may or may not work as well. So with these new technologies, of course, come these new challenges. And interestingly, with something like voice, it's all about the context, and that's been one of the things that's been so hard to get the programming right on. So if I say to you, let's say you work in a cafe, and I come into the cafe, and I would say, I would like a coffee to go. It's a cafe, and the context is obvious, but when you talk to Alexa, she doesn't necessarily know the context of what you're thinking and where you are. The context, interestingly, when the internet came out, we lost some of the opportunities we had before. I don't know if you remember, but when the internet apps first came out, you couldn't do drop-down boxes anymore. We initially lost, from a human factors point of view, from an interface point of view, those of us who were doing interface design felt we had gone backwards. We had a lot of capability in software that we didn't have initially when everything went online. Luckily, a lot of that has caught up now. And we have the small screens that has been interesting to design for. So, in the third era that we just described, really we got to the point where the device didn't matter. It was almost irrelevant what machine you were on. And the goal, really, I think, with examples like Eric Whitaker, is to collaborate and communicate. That's what's really so important. That's what people want to do. That's the human factor aspect of technology that is the most important and the driving force to those of us who are in human-computer interaction. All right, so I used to call this the future of human-computer interaction, but then I had to change it to the future of human-technology interaction, because as we've moved forward, we're not talking about computers anymore. We're talking about a lot of different devices, and we're in some interesting transition points right now from the present into the future. So I said before, during one of the eras, we were trying to take the physical and make it digital. But one of the things we're trying to do now is blend the physical with the digital so that there really isn't a distinction between them. So Amazon has these dash buttons. This is a little button where it says Tide, the detergent Tide, which is, I guess, the #1 selling detergent in the US. And you put this little thing on your washing machine. And so when you realize you're out of laundry detergent, you press that white button. And what that does, of course, is send your order into Amazon, so your laundry detergent will be shipped to you. So we're now blending the physical. It's a button that you stick onto your washing machine, but we're blending the physical and the digital because when you press it, it actually sends a signal to buy something. Now we're getting into, of course, augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. And so the human factors and human-computer interaction of these systems are opening up a whole new world, and we're having to try and come up really fast with guidelines. I mean, we know how the technology works, but what do we do about the human-technology interaction? What's tricky about AR? What's tricky about VR? What's tough for the human in these interactions? Okay, wait, here's a quiz. First, mass market virtual reality system. Before or after 2010? How many people say before? How many people say after? You probably don't remember this. 1994. It didn't really go anywhere, which is probably why you don't remember it. But actually, they were marketing the Sega VR back in 1994. And it took a while for this technology to really get to the point where it is usable. In addition to this transition of the physical and the digital blending, we have the biological and the machine world now blending. So we have devices such as this. This is a man who, because of injury or disease, I don't remember which one it is, he doesn't have control of his limbs. He can't control his arms and his legs. And then you see those two devices coming out of his head. He's actually had something implanted underneath his scalp that allows them to screw these into his scalp. And what he does is he thinks, I want to move my arm, and that thought signal goes through one of the boxes and goes to an external computer, and then comes back into the other box to the motor cortex of his brain and gives the signal that he's unable to give because of the problems he has in his brain. And now he can move his limbs. So he's learning how to feed himself, how to move his arms and his legs, the way we all do, just by thinking, I want to raise my arm. And he needs the assist of the machines to do it. This woman has a similar device implanted. You notice she only has one. So she does not move at all, has no control over her limbs. But in this case, she's taking actions on the computer. She can type, she can use a mouse, she can control the mouse and control the keyboard just by thinking. So she thinks, I want to move the mouse over here, and then the mouse moves. In this case, that box, the transmission of the signal is coming from her brain and going right into the computer and is controlling the mouse movement. Now, we now can do a lot of this wirelessly. So this is a case, this is Dr. Thomas Duell from the University of Washington in the US. He's wearing an EEG cap, and he's thinking about music, and then the EEG is connected wirelessly to a music synthesizer, and it plays the notes and the music that he's thinking about. So this brain-computer interface, which is like a whole nother world, is really, that's taking off in a very, very big way. So we're combining the biological with the machine. We're also now in a transition where the technology, as we know, is becoming independent. So you can have a refrigerator that knows when you're low on milk and just orders the milk for you. Now in this case, there isn't a human technology interaction because it's doing it on its own. The car, supposedly, hopefully, is driving on its own. And the machines are learning to program themselves. So, you know, how does a computer know what a cat is? Well, instead of programming it to describe a cat, which can be difficult because a cat can look like this, you know, or a cat can look like that. How do you explain that all to a computer? Well, you don't have to. You just give the computer a lot of pictures of cats and tell it when it guesses, is this a cat or not? You say, yes, you're right, no, you're wrong, and eventually it teaches itself. And there's a wonderful TED Talk by Fei-Fei Li where she describes what this process is like. We have robots. This is a Tesla factory. They have 160 robots, some of which work independently, some of which work with humans. And industrial robots have been around for a while. They're getting more and more sophisticated. But that's not the only way that robots are really starting to be part of our world. So this is a robot that, from Boston Dynamics, that is fairly independent. And which appears to be routinely annoyed by humans or tortured by humans. And an interesting thing happens when humans start to relate to robots. Now, this robot doesn't look like a human, but it kind of looks like an animal. Maybe it's kind of like a dog. Maybe it's, if it were bigger, maybe it's kind of like a horse or something like that. And what happens when humans start to interact with these animals is they start to put the characteristics of the animal that they think it's like, they start to put those characteristics onto the machine. This one is a little more humanoid-like. Now, it doesn't really have a face, but the way it walks is kind of like the way a human walks. So we know from the research on people's reactions to robots that if it walks like this and kind of is like a human, two very interesting things happen. One is, of course, we start to think unconsciously, and we don't realize it, we start to think, okay, it's got feelings, you know, like a person would. Of course, it doesn't have feelings, but it's hard for us not to put that on it. And you know, you're like, oh, watch out! You almost fell. And then the other interesting thing is people start to think that the robots have feelings for them. And they don't, but they think it does. So at some point, we start rooting for the robot, you know, and then at some point, we kind of get mad at the human. It's like, stop. Let the guy pick up the darn box, right? Because we are empathetic creatures, and it's hard for us to not have empathy for machines. This little guy is called a blab droid. It's a little, it's this big, you know, just that big. It's made out of cardboard. Inside it has a camera, and it talks. And what the inventors of the blab droid like to do is they put this blab droid in a public gathering, like they might put it in a conference like this, and the blab droid will just wander around on its own, and it will talk to people, and they tend to pick it up, and they tend to start talking back. And they've programmed it with this little boy voice, because what they have found out is that if it sounds like a child, people tend to talk to it more. And the blab droid asks all kinds of personal questions. It starts off with, you know, if there was no laws and there were no money, what would you do? You know, kind of like theoretical questions. But then it starts asking more and more personal questions, like, what is something that you've done that you've never told anybody about? Right? Or what is the thing in your life that you regret? And people just pour their hearts out to this little cardboard thing. And in fact, what the inventor found out was that as it goes, you know, it's made out of cardboard, as it goes around, it bumps into things, it gets bent and wrinkled. And the more wrinkled and bent it gets, the more people pour their heart out to it. So we are amazingly willing to have conversations and to have relationships with robots. In Japan, where they have a shortage of people to work in nursing homes and homes for the elderly, they're starting now to use robots to do things like, you know, carry and lift and take care of people. And we're starting to use robots to have relationships with. These are robot pets, and we know from the research on humans and pets that when you pet something soft and furry, it releases oxytocin in the human. Oxytocin will make you relax, and it will make you feel bonded to whatever the soft furry thing is that you're petting. Now, in real life, a real dog also releases oxytocin, so the dog bonds to you. By the way, cats, if you're petting a cat, you release oxytocin, and the cat maybe not, right? Because we know cats aren't that friendly to humans sometimes. But with these robots, the humans release oxytocin as they pet the robot. Of course, the robot doesn't release oxytocin back. So we will, and we already are starting to have relationships with robots. Now, as I said, with every new technology, there's challenges. So what are some of the challenges here? There's some interesting human factors elements that we're just starting to work out with things like AR and VR. So for instance, I'll give you an example. You notice she's got her arm raised and she's clicking or moving. Unless you really work out a lot, if you hold your arm up for more than a minute or two, it starts to ache, right? So this assumption that people will be just constantly, doing this and holding their arm up and going, it hurts, right? And so we have to deal with how are we, it's a great idea to make gestures like this, but we're not going to be able to do it for very long. The other thing we have to think about and worry about is the size of the target. Because if you're using your finger to point at something that is just, in the air, you need a pretty large target. It's not the same as moving a little arrow on a screen. And so the targets, you have to make sure to make the targets nice and big. We know there are issues with virtual reality that we have to think about. For instance, if something is far away in the virtual reality field, it needs to be a little not clear, a little faded, a little obscured. Because in real life, when we are looking at something far away, there are air particles in between us and that object, and we're used to things far away not being crystal clear. When they're crystal clear and they're real far away, that confuses our brain and our visual system. We know that in virtual reality, it's actually helpful to put obstacles in a path. Instead of having it totally clear, we actually want to plant things like a box or a shrub or a chair, because humans are used to working their way around a path. And without a path, they kind of don't know where to go. And the path of objects tells them where to go. So we have some of these interesting human-computer aspects that we need to continue to learn and build into these technologies. So we had our third era, and now we're in the fourth era. And moving forward, we're in the fourth era. The machines are independent. We have relationships with the machines. But what is the goal of these kinds of interactions? What is the role of the machine? What is the role of the human? And what's the relationship that we want to have? From a human factors, human technology interaction, these are some of the central questions that we have. And I have another story now that I want to tell you. I told you the story when I first used a computer, and I did get my graduate degree, and I did start working in the field of human factors. I had some, during graduate school and right after graduate school, I had some personal events that happened in my life that were challenging. I think we all have that, and maybe especially when we're young. Right before I started graduate school, my mother died. While I was in graduate school, my father died. Right after graduate school, I got married, I got divorced. The divorce meant I had financial difficulties. So I found myself starting this new career in human factors with kind of bereft. No friends, no family. I moved myself to a new city, start all over. I moved to the new city, start a brand new job, and I moved into a new apartment. And it turns out the apartment was infested with fleas. You know, fleas, little bugs. I couldn't get any sleep at night. They were all over the place. So my landlord, he fumigated the whole apartment. You know, they released these bombs with all these chemicals. So now I had all these chemicals in the yard, and in the apartment. And I had to take all my clothes and take them to get them cleaned because it was full of all these chemicals. So I pack up all my clothes, I take them to a laundromat, you know, put them in the washing machine. But, you know, I have this new job. I can't be gone from it. So I go to the office, I go to my new office, and then I take a break and go to the laundromat to put the clothes in the dryer. And they're gone. Someone has stolen all my clothes from the laundromat. Now, look at me, okay? who wears clothes for a 5 foot tall person? Like, why would they want my clothes? They were not very fancy clothes. So now the only clothes I own are the clothes I'm wearing. I go back to my office at the new job, and I remember the moment. I was sitting in my office. I had my head in my hands, you know? And I'm thinking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And back then, I believed in the power of stories to affect your life. I found out many years later that there's lots of research on this, and that stories do affect our lives. They affect the decisions we make. And I thought to myself, I must have a self-story that's causing me to make some decisions that aren't good. So I sat there and I thought, you know, I have a story that goes like this. I am a strong person. I can survive anything. Now, I had that story, and that story was very useful because I had gone through all these life events. And it was a great story, but then I decided maybe that story was now causing me to make decisions that were not good. Maybe I needed a news story. So I came up with one right on the spot. I came up with the story, My Life is Easy and Graceful. I thought that sounded a lot better. I thought maybe I'll make some decisions that are better if I have that story. As soon as I had that thought, a woman walked by, one of the people in the office. I had just barely met her, and she stuck her head in the door and she said, "How's it going?" Now, with the old story of I'm strong, I can survive anything, my normal answer was, great. It's all great, even when it wasn't. And I started to say that, and then I thought, no. I have the news story, my life is easy and graceful. So I said, well, actually, not that good. And I told her the story about the laundromat. And she said, and the fleas. She said, this is terrible. I'm going to help you. Now, again, with the old story, I wouldn't have accepted help. But with the new story, let's accept help. Let's have things be easy and graceful. So she had a friend who was a lawyer. They got me out of the lease. She said, I have room in my home. Come live with me. She actually even helped me buy a new wardrobe. Not money-wise, but she had better fashion sense than I did. So actually, that was a turning point in my life. Now, I can't say everything was always easy and graceful from then on. We all have things happen. But it was definitely easier than before. So I believe in the power of stories to change what we do. Yuval Harari, who wrote the book *Sapiens*, who was also a speaker here at USI, he talks about stories, he talks about myths. He talks about collective stories that we have together. And I bring this up now because I want to talk about the story we have about the future of human technology interaction. Sometimes I think we believe that the technology has its own track, its own destiny. You know, like we don't have any control over it. We're gonna, we have cell phones and we have internet, we figured that out, and we figured out AR and VR and AI, and machines are gonna be doing, all the learning, and they're gonna do everything. And, that's very possibly true. But we have some control over it, at least right now. And I would like us to think up a collective story in which the future of this technology really fits humans and the things we want to do and the goals we have. We're at this interesting transition point, and if we don't come up with a good story, the technology will create a story for us that we will need to live with because there's a lot of big implications. So my challenge to you is to come up with the story that you want, to collectively come up with the story we all want that moves us forward with human technology interaction in a way that really serves the humans. Voila. Merci. Thank you very much. Thank you.